recording for us, please.
Just did.
Okay. Are we public now? Okay. I want to call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order on December 6th, 2024. This will be a virtual meeting. There'll be no in-person public access at this meeting. Members of the public may attend virtually via Zoom or by phone, and the phone numbers and all that are on the agenda item. The first item I want to get to is public comment. Then just for the public, we are going to then start with the supplemental budget. Since we have Guilford Mooring here, the DPW superintendent, and then we'll go back to the budget guidelines. So if you want to, we'll open this up to public comment. If anyone wishes to make a public comment, please raise your hand at this point. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand, so I'll close public comment and then we'll move right on to the supplemental budget. The first one is the Council Order FY 2505C, an order appropriating funds for a portion of the Town of Amherst Capital Program sidewalk equipment. And we've had this before, and we haven't been able to reach an agreement on what we want to recommend. So, does anyone, Guilford? Do you want to just again kind of? I think your request has been reduced. So, if you could just give us a little background or a little intro to this, that would be helpful.
So to maintain the sidewalks in town, we usually have two pieces of equipment we use primarily to do that, to get it done within 24 hours. We have a third piece of equipment, which is more of a backup. It's not as reliable. The backup has been down for quite a while now. And then the second piece of equipment, has gone down as well. So we asked during last capital season for a replacement. So we would like to go ahead and get that replacement going a little faster than we could, because we're down to one piece of equipment. This storm was not a big deal, but a bigger storm, we would have a little more issue doing the sidewalks. If you, I know there's a lot of contention about this. Really, yes or no would be great. If you say no, that's fine. Yes is fine too, but we just need to move on and make a decision so we can decide what we're going to do if this is not going to be coming forward.
I think the concern was the amount that was requested. And as I recall, you did send an updated memo that talked about two different pieces of equipment, and I think you said that you could reduce the budget request. I don't know whether that is, I don't have that in front of me, but I do remember I think it was 140,000 was a reduced request. I don't know whether that was a reduction in your request, or you said you could live with that.
There's a piece of machinery sitting at a dealership right now that's $140,000. This is what we were asking for.
Okay. So is there any other discussion of this by the committee? Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, Guilford, can you go into more specifics as to what this piece of equipment can be used for outside of snow removal on sidewalks? Because I think we're still not clear what its use is outside of that. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm concerned that this request is trying to, and it's not you, Guilford, I just want to make sure, but JCPC said no, and then it's suddenly back and trying to avoid a JCPC process. And I'm just uncomfortable with that, but I'd really like to know what this piece of equipment is good for specifically, like what else would it be used for outside of snow removal?
Let me pull up the piece of equipment and I'll share the pictures if you'd like.
Okay.
Be great.
Actually, this is a good picture to share with you. Share. So everyone can see the machine.
Yep.
So this is basically it. It's basically a miniaturized, it's a compact loader. So when it's not being used for snow plow or snow blower as it is here, you could then use it as a small loader. The same thing we do with our Bobcat and some of the other small loaders we have. Right, we've had two of this type of equipment before. One is not powerful enough to use for snow operations. It's too small. The engine is too small, and the hydraulics is too small. The one we're asking for, we can run the snow blower, we can run the plows, we can run the angle plows, not just a straight plow. And then we can use it for a loader. We can use it for a bucket loader, a forklift loader. We can also attach the stump grinder we have to it and do stumps with it. Those are the things you can do with it as well. So it's an all-purpose machine and it's narrow. It's only as wide as the sidewalks. It's only 4 feet wide. So this is why we chose this type of machinery. The other machine we have for snow plowing sidewalks is actually built more for actually doing sidewalks and more for winter conditions. And this is just the one that would be the extra one at this point, the backup to and do the secondary route, not the primary route of the schools in downtown.
Andy?
Yeah, you mentioned that this is available on a dealer. How quickly could you get it?
It could be here with a week after after it's approved and the account set up.
Okay, I just want to share with the committee then that that's an important consideration, because if it is essential for use in this winter season, deferring to JCPC, which there are reasons to want to do that, but it interferes with being able to get the equipment, and the fact that the backup is no longer available are all factors that I would like us to consider. So I'll take my hand down now.
Counselor Haneke?
You talked about a lot of attachments, Guilford. Do we own those attachments already, or do we need to buy the attachments, and is that an additional cost?
We usually buy a new snow plow when we buy the piece of equipment. So the snow plow is included in the attachment, but the bucket and the forks that we have those already. We would use the same ones. I forgot to say that when we did the capital improvement plan, went through the capital process, we were called and said there wasn't enough money and we're looking for things that could possibly make it to next year. And at the time, this could make it to next year. But between the intervening time of yes and no and so forth, the machine we can't keep the machine running. So that's what happened. We took it out of the plan or told them to move it to next year because there wasn't enough money for the entire capital plan.
Any other discussion? All right, so I guess we need to make a recommendation one way or the other. I guess we'll keep this at the 200,000 since that's what was requested. Does anyone want to move to reduce the amount? Counselor Haneke, did you have a comment?
I actually have a somewhat related but unrelated to this question. So it's not for Guilford, it's for Paul, and I see that Paul is on here. Related to these, this is one of several orders that came in for closeout. And I have a question related to closeout. And in particular, and spending of capital outside of our JCPC plan. And then I'm happy to make a motion, Bob. But I have heard that, in the past, we've received sort of off-cycle requests for capital because equipment has come in more expensive than before. And you don't want to wait till JCPC because we've already authorized the purchase of the equipment, but we don't have enough money for it, or something broke down at the police station or at town hall that needs a repair that capital money isn't allocated for. We've received those requests for municipal operations, but we've never received those requests for elementary school operations in mid-year requests. And I have heard that in this fiscal year, that the elementary school needed a large sum of money to spend for capital improvements, well, because something at Crocker Farm failed. How was that failure at Crocker Farm paid for? Because presumably they didn't have money within their capital program requests to pay for it, yet we as a council never saw a request to pay for it. And I've heard that they had to use operating money to pay for a capital request like that. And so I'm curious, as the discussion goes about how we fund capital and things like that, how does the school pay for capital requests that are unexpected, similar to police station HVAC failing when Crocker fails or something that they don't have the capital for within the capital budget? How do they pay for it mid-year if you're not coming to the council for additional free cash to do so?
And Melissa can weigh on this as well if she chooses. So the Crocker Farm situation is a maintenance thing. It was the fire alarm system that was down. And I have talked with the superintendent as to whether what the impact on their budget was going to be. And I'm meeting with her again this afternoon. I can raise it with her to see if there is a capital need there or that is required. But typically, if things come to us from department heads, then we forward that on to the council for consideration.
And I guess department head, does that include non-municipal department heads? That's where I think there's things. So that has to come from the superintendent, not facilities at the school level.
Yeah, so it would come through anything from the schools would come through the superintendent. The schools maintain all their own buildings and manage their fleet and their facilities. So that's what their responsibility is, and anything that would come, just like anything to you from a municipal department, come through the town manager.
Thank you. I'm gonna do this in two motions because it was confusing last time at the council. I guess we only make recommendations. I move to recommend that the council reduce Council Order FY 25-05C, an order appropriating funds for a portion of the Town of Amherst Capital Program sidewalk equipment from 200,000 to 140,000.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. We'll vote on that then. On that recommendation, I will vote aye for that. Andy,
Aye.
Councilor Haneke,
Aye.
Councilor Walker.
Yeah.
Okay. Bernie.
Support.
All right, so that is unanimous to reduce it to. Okay. Is there a motion now to make a recommendation on this reduced appropriation transfer order?
I move to recommend the council approve appropriation and transfer order FY 25-05C, an order appropriating funds for a portion of the Town of Amherst capital program sidewalk equipment as amended.
And I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion?
I just, Bob,
Yes.
when you put this in the report, Athena is copying your recommended motions exactly as is, and our motions at the council normally include the date of the finance committee report, when the public forum was held and all of that. So the recommended motion should not necessarily be exactly as we just said, but should include all of the, if this passes, that should include all of that stuff that's normally included. So I just ask that you go back to a prior appropriation and transfer order vote to see what that motion should look like when you put it in your report.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Athena, maybe you can help me with that, just to make sure that I get it right. So we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Is there any other discussion? All right, we should then vote. I will vote aye. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Is there some discussion? Okay. Okay, let's go for a vote then. I vote aye. Counselor Haneke?
Aye.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Bernie?
Support.
All right, so it's unanimous with one person absent or two resident members absent. All right, so we will pass that on to the council for their up or down vote. So the next order is FY 25-04B, order appropriating a supplemental increase to the Town of Amherst Sewer Enterprise Fund operating budget for fiscal year 25. Athena, could you, or Melissa, could you please put that up, please? It's to come from the sewer enterprise fund retained earnings. So there's no extra spending from the taxpayers other than through the water and sewer fees. Athena, can you, great. Or Melissa, can you put that up, please? Great. Right, so my understanding is this is just in order to because the operations are costing more than we anticipated. Is that right? Is Guilford still here? Yes, Guilford, could you please address the reason for this, please?
So yes, the issue for this is that the contract we have for sludge removal is $250,000 more than we anticipated.
Okay.
And we entered into a new contract recently, and to make it to the end of the year, we need to have the 250,000 added to the budget.
All right. Any comments on that? Andy?
Yeah, I just have one suggestion, if possible, and it covers all of these that are now coming, the next several that relate to the same enterprise fund. And that is that when we do the report, if there is any estimate of whether it is going to impact future sewer fees and the amount, I think we owe it to the council and the public to provide that information. If that's not available, then maybe we should say so, but I think that was the one missing piece that I found in the cover memo that covered all of the sewer fund requests. Was there was no mention of possible impact on rates.
I
You have
can
any-
answer this one if you
Okay.
like.
Yes.
So
ahead.
because we're taking this from retained earnings, there is no immediate impact on rates by doing this. Going forward, this cost of sludge disposal is going to go up. And as we go forward, sludge disposal will have an impact on the rates and will increase the rates at some point, maybe next year or the year after.
And I'll be looking for sort of the same answer on the other orders.
Counselor Haneke?
My comment was gonna be similar, and I'm actually concerned with Guilford's response of maybe next year, because this is now the second year in a row at this point that if we had not done this transfer, the FY 24 numbers, the sewer fund was not able to cover all of its expenses with its revenues, particularly in FY 24. It did not make its transfer to the general fund for, I forget what it's called, the interdepartmental costs or whatever it is. Were not transferred from sewer enterprise fund into the municipal general fund to pay for the costs of, say, finance department and payroll processing and all of that non-sewer employees do. That was FY 24, and now we're making a retained earnings transfer to pay for. And I'm okay. It's unexpected. You attempted to. You guessed wrong. I understand that, but to then say we might not raise the rates to cover this known cost next year concerns me. I want to know, if we raised the rates instead of using retained earnings, how much would the rates need to go up to cover an extra $250,000 in expenses? Are we talking about an extra penny per 100 cubic feet? I think is how we bill sewer. Are we talking an extra dime? Are we talking an extra dollar? What's sort of the large range of this? As you know, I just did it by factors of 10, right? Like I know you might not be able to guess there, but are we talking a penny, a dime, or a dollar, or somewhere in those ranges? And why wouldn't we be saying we're absolutely going to raise the rates to make sure these known now costs are covered in the rate we adopt for FY 26?
So that's a good question. And the way I'm looking at it one way, and you were looking at it into the future way is how I see your question. This exact ask for money, no, we do not need to ask for a change in the rate to add $250,000 to the budget. In the future, yes, there will be some changes, and you probably, as we discuss the future and what the rate will be, the rates are probably going up. They go up pretty much every other year. The percentage of the rate increase will probably be a lot larger than people think in the next year or two. Our neighbors are all seeing increases, which are quite a bit larger than our rate increases. And that's a bigger discussion, and there's more that goes into that discussion than this $250,000. So I was keeping it at the 250. You're asking a bigger question, and yes, as we go into the rate discussion and the budget discussion for next year, I imagine the sewer rate increase will be much larger than it has been in the past, and I imagine there will be a large increase for sewer. I do not expect water may have as much of an increase or any increase, but you're asking a question that we haven't started putting the numbers together and started even trying to make the guesses yet for next year. And to tell the truth, the way the budgeting has been the last 4 years, with the way the economy goes up and down, or actually it's just going up. People say inflation's going down, but we've already inflated a large amount, and we didn't cover for that inflation. So our budgets are for water and wastewater, even the general fund budgets are way out of whack with the cost of everything right now. And we just have to figure out how to even come close to getting back in line with the world right now.
Andy?
Well, I think that we owe it to the public, to our customers, if you will, information that they should expect an increase into if it's possible. And I know that Sonia used to have, and I'm sure it's still around, and that Holly or Melissa have a spreadsheet that she used to determine to make calculations on rates for water and sewer. You know, if there's any way that spreadsheet can be used to make estimates, the more information that we give to the public, I think that the better the credibility and understanding will be down the line, and that's always helpful.
I agree with that statement, but then again, we haven't even started the process for the next budget year. So as we talk about this now, and if you want us to start telling people, we're not telling them anything that's concrete or anything we've actually vetted yet. So it is a process, and we will get to the point where we will be passing that information out and discussing it. Melissa probably has more to say than I do.
Melissa?
So, like Guilford said, we've already scheduled those meetings to discuss the rates, but in order to do that, we have to have, you know, sort of an idea of what the budget is going forward, and far more, like Guilford said, far more things than this one transfer or even any of the transfers in front of you go into that. Consumption goes into that for a great deal. And as consumption decreases, then our rates have to go up, even if nothing else changes. I mean, it's all a large calculation, and we're beginning the process for that now. But just like our budgets for fiscal 26, you know, to make a projection now with half the information it's not a very good projection. So we're starting those meetings. We have our first meeting scheduled for next week to start looking at the rates.
Bernie?
Yeah, yeah, the software keeps shutting off my hands, so I have to keep remembering to put it back up. Guilford's correct that a decrease in the rate of inflation isn't deflation. It just means prices aren't going up as fast. And it's always worth pointing out that cities and towns have, because of what we do and how we purchase stuff, typically have a higher rate of inflation than you find in the consumer price index. So that's just a statement. Guilford, we've got a very old plant. If we're going to talk about a gravity belt replacement before too long, is there any other process improvements that you're looking at that might reduce our costs of operation, might actually be helpful in this regard?
Not to reduce our cost of operation in the next year or two, no. To reduce our cost of operation long term, maybe. Electricity prices are still going up, and the biggest, if you went on the tour, you'll remember that the chief operator Andrew Brace he says we have to pump into the plant, we have to pump out of the plant. So we're going to have power no matter what to make this process work. And the power prices are just still going up. Massachusetts has not, as a state, looked at sludge disposal and the issue of sludge disposal as a statewide issue. And as such, there's things that could be done to deal with sludge disposal on a statewide basis that would help lower our cost. But until the state and the EPA can come to terms with them, our sludge disposal costs are going to go up. So probably in the foreseeable next 5-10 years, there will be increases in those two costs, electricity and in sludge disposal. I don't see any change with the different administration coming in either. It's going to be an issue of taking and being willing to take some of the technology that's out there and being willing to actually use it in Massachusetts, which the state has not been willing to do. So I don't
It's
really see anything.
Familiar story about the state.
Yeah,
being
I don't see any
behind the curve.
golden bullet to reduce operating costs.
Okay. The other question I have is that when you and Melissa and others sit down to look at the rates, are you going to build in an increment that would accommodate for potential cost increases? In other words, you develop what the actual operating cost is going to be, and then add on an increment to that that could help bolster revenues and stave off some of the or provide some funds for some of these unanticipated cost increases.
We've talked about it in the past, and we've not really done it yet because we've been trying to stay. Well, some people say we're a little too cheap. Some people say we're affordable. We don't want to be too expensive. It's that balancing act we have to meet. So we haven't really done it, but I think we're truly at the point where there's got to be some discussion about setting aside maybe a capital reserve that is used besides the undesignated fund balance. Those are things that will have to be discussed this year. We are getting to that point, and the volatility seems to be greater than any other time I think I've worked in this field.
Again, my memory of this is a little fuzzy, but I think the Department of Revenue, when you calculate these rates, the Department of Revenue does give you the opportunity to increase the rate a bit for capital improvements or unforeseen expenses. And I would encourage, I mean, nobody likes to see the costs go up. Everybody wants to be compared with being cheaper than the next town over. But I think we really need to do that because environmental concerns and being able to manage waste is going to be pretty volatile in the future, and Massachusetts is a little bit slow in adopting new processes. So my suggestion would be that you plan in an increment for this stuff. Thank you.
Any other discussion? So do we have a motion on this referral? Councilor Haneke?
I move to recommend the council adopt council order FY 25-04B, an order appropriating and supplementing a supplemental increase to the Town of Amherst Sewer Enterprise Fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, let's go on to a vote then. I will vote aye. Councilor Walker?
Yes.
Councilor Haneke?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Bernie?
Support.
Okay, so it's unanimous of the folks who are here. Moving on, the next one is Council Order FY 25-04C, in order appropriating a supplemental increase to the Town of Amherst Solid Waste Enterprise Fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025. It's an order of, it's increasing it $20,000 because of increased site monitoring costs for PFAS chemicals. Any comments on this? Guilford, do you want to give us a little background on this?
You basically covered it, and the state is concerned about PFAS, as everyone knows, and we're testing for PFAS now at water, wastewater, and now solid waste. So this is pretty much everything. If they make us test stormwater, that would be next. But they are making us test the monitoring wells at the landfill and see if there's PFAS in there. And we're in the process of doing it, but the cost is more than we did budget for the budget years. And the cost is about $20,000 for this one round of testing.
Okay, any comments or questions? Is there a motion to make a referral to the council?
I'll move to recommend the council adopt Council Order FY 25-04C, an order appropriating a supplemental increase to the Town of Amherst Solid Waste Enterprise Fund operating budget for fiscal year 2025.
And I'll second.
All right, so any other discussion? All right, let's move to a vote. I vote yes. Andy?
Yes.
Councilor Haneke?
Aye.
Councilor Walker?
Yes.
Bernie?
Support.
Okay, so this unanimous. And finally, for Guilford, we have Council Order 25, FY 2505B, an order appropriating funds for the Town of Amherst Sewer Fund Capital Program, sewer collection system and wastewater treatment pH and chlorine studies, and additional costs associated with the gravity belt thickener project. So we need it's all coming from retained earnings of the sewer enterprise fund, a total of 575,000. And if you can see on this that the pH study is a permit requirement, and it's for $40,000. The chlorine study, it's I understand, Guilford, that's to avoid any violations. The gravity belt thickener additional costs is just costs that's inherent in these types of projects. Is that correct?
Sort of. The pH study is a requirement of our permit. The chlorine study is more of a to see what we can do to improve and be better so we don't violate our permit as much
Right.
as we've been doing recently. And yes, the gravity belt thickener are additional costs that have arisen during the project that were unforeseen.
Okay. Any other any comments or questions? Andy?
Yeah, just Guilford degree of confidence that we now have the gravity belt thickener, which we've appropriated several times for, finally paid for, and that this is going to be it, or is there any uncertainty left?
I think this is probably the last bit. There is a little bit of uncertainty. We have one more tank we have to inspect, which we can't inspect until January. I don't expect it's going to be the work in there to repair that tank is going to be very much, but this is the bulk of what we'll probably have for the last change orders, and there'll be probably one more final change order to cover that tank work. But I think we'll cover it in this amount we're asking for here.
Any other comments or questions? So is there a motion to make a referral? To make a recommendation, rather?
I move to recommend the council adopt Council Order FY 25-05B, an order appropriating funds for the Town of Amherst Sewer Fund Capital Program, sewer collection system and wastewater treatment pH and chlorine studies, and additional cost associated with the gravity belt thickener project.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Second. So any other comments, questions, or discussion? All right, let's move to a vote. I vote yes. Councilor Haneke?
Aye.
Councilor Walker?
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Bernie.
Support.
All right, so it's unanimous. All right, I think that covers everything for Guilford.
Thank you
So
very
thank you.
much.
Thank you, Guilford, for attending this meeting and for providing the information. The last order is the CPA transfer order FY 2508A, an order appropriating and authorizing debt for construction of a reoriented track and field facility known as option 3C at the Amherst Pelham Regional High School. Can Melissa, or can you put this order up? I don't have it at my fingertips. So this is coming from the CPA committee. We had a discussion of this earlier this calendar year, and well, actually, we've had a long discussion of this over many years, and it's really to reorient the track and field and improve it to basically, I guess, international standards. It would support all of the sports that the high school requires for track and field. And it's, designed to really kind of not only kind of improve things as they are, but fit into a larger study or a larger view of the recreational facilities around the high school that would require reorienting the field in order to be consistent with that. So, Paul, did you want to add?
I just want, I'm just asking, I'd like Melissa to bring Dave Zomack in.
Okay.
We're working on it.
He's coming.
Hi, Dave. Please join us. And do you have any comments on or background for this project?
Yeah, I must say, Bob, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I must say I'm a little unprepared because our team was told that this would come up on Tuesday. So I'm not prepared with any presentation. Bob Parent, who's been working with me, is not available right now, and we did not ask SLR consultants to join us. We do have a kind of a more robust presentation that we wanted to give the finance committee on where we are with the project. I'm happy to give a brief overview of where we are, if that would be helpful. It would kind of mimic what we talked about on Monday night with the full council.
Since we're not, Bob, if I may, since we're not ready with Bob and the consultants today, I think it would be good if we could hold this one and you have the budget guidelines to contend with today. So if that's okay with you, Dave, let's plan on our original plan.
That would work well for me if it's okay with the finance committee, because I think there will be, so, we were asked a lot of questions on Monday night and we have, full answers for those, but it would be nice to have our designer there as well as Bob and myself, because we'll come at all of those questions that multiple counselors asked us on Monday night. I believe
Okay.
there's also a memo. We have a memo ready, if it's not already gone to you, a memo outlining some of the answers to those questions.
I put those documents that you sent, Dave, in the packet for today because it was on the agenda for today, but also for the packet at the next finance committee meeting, because I assumed that that's when we would be taking it up.
Okay, we'll take it up on Tuesday. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That's helpful.
I think it'll be much more beneficial for the finance committee if we do that Tuesday.
That's fine. We certainly have our full agenda today. So let's move on to the budget guidelines. This is what I'm sure everyone wants to get into. We presented this to the council on Monday, and we had a few comments. Let me see if I can summarize the comments and other people can weigh in. I mean, I think there was some comments and concerns around increasing the regional school budget, the baseline for it, and whether that was sort of how that would work and whether we really wanted to get into that. There was a little bit of discussion on OPEB, a question about whether this would slow OPEB funding. It doesn't reduce it from the previous year, but it doesn't increase it. So in some interpretations, it would slow the what we were paying into it. We had a little bit of a discussion or questions on the 4 models for the major capital projects. And I think we as a committee decided that we wanted to spend a little bit more time on that. I think the council felt similarly that the finance committee needed to spend more time on that before we could make a recommendation for that. And I guess there was another discussion about the 5% surplus, whether that was a reasonable target. And there was some discussion of the proposal again that the council did not support, $1 million for roads and sidewalks. Should we, there may be a motion to reduce that amount, come back and with a smaller amount for that. So does anyone have anything else that was really discussed? Anyone want to bring up any other issues that you think? So I would recommend, Andy?
The additional thing I'd like to do is I again would like to have a discussion where I'm present. I'm sorry I wasn't at the last meeting, about the wisdom of having an executive summary on a relatively short document.
Let's talk about that. I presented it to the council that there was some concern that the executive summary just doesn't. If one only reads the executive summary, you don't get the full context of the committee's deliberation. And I don't recall that we got a lot of response to that. Andy, did you want to comment on that, or did you want to further?
Yeah, I always and I understand the reasons for having executive summaries on documents, particularly long documents, but they always run into the problem that, as you indicated, people can either read the executive summary and then look at that as the recommendations, as opposed to reading the entire document as a whole. And for something that is that is not particularly lengthy, I just don't think that it's a necessary piece to have. And we get into the question of whether the bullets really don't create the understanding that is needed to really appreciate what the complexity of the issues are that the council needs to understand.
Counselor Haneke?
So that's the problem with any executive summary. I don't think Andy's saying that this one's a problem because we haven't written it right. Executive summaries never capture the full intricacies. They're meant to summarize the conclusions. This summarizes the conclusions. The reason I think it's really important, although if we got rid of it, I would ask for something else be done in the document, is the manager, the goal of this document is to ensure that, or to tell the manager, give us a budget that meets these guidelines. And an executive summary says, here are the guidelines. It says, these are what we're going to be judging your budget by. And it's right there. It's easy to find. We don't have to wade through and then discuss and debate in May what guidelines we asked him to meet. We've adopted them in the executive summary. That's the guidelines we're asking him to meet. Last year, when I was on finance committee for the first time for a budget review, I went back to the budget guidelines, and I had a really hard time figuring out what we'd actually told him the guidelines were, because they were throughout the entire document. They weren't summarized anywhere. They were worded somewhat as suggestions, somewhat as this, and I wasn't even sure what guidelines that I could find in there that council actually supported as a whole in terms of how do we judge the budget that's presented against these. It was really hard. And for example, we missed that the guidelines said put money in for potential use for consultants for the charter review, because it was buried somewhere and none of us thought to ask about that one during the budget discussion of, does this budget meet the guidelines? We missed it. The executive summary would give us a checklist to start the budget review with and say, okay, does the budget have a Prop 2.5 override proposed? No, it meets our budget guidelines. Did the budget adjust the revenue projections with a focus on areas where forecasts have proven conservative? No, or yes, it meets or doesn't meet it. Does it provide at least 3% year-over-year increases? Did it then add into XYZ? I mean, does it have 10.5% for capital? Like, it gives us the checklist that we should be starting our review of the FY26 budget with in May at our first meeting. Before we ask anything else, does it meet our guidelines? If we don't have this checklist, how do we know and how do we come up with that answer without then recreating a checklist? So I find the executive summary extremely helpful for our purposes come May. And so I don't want to delete it.
Bernie?
I'm agreeing with Councilor Haneke. I think the having the checklist, having the Cliff Notes version of this is helpful. It, especially months from now when we go back and review this, to trigger memories. The other thing is that I'm sure that Paul and Melissa and Holly and others don't need a checklist. They've suffered through this. They understand it. they'll do what they can to meet these. But this has a broader public function. You just have to look at who it's CC'd to, and then the fact that it gets published and out. So I think there's an education component here that needs to remain. And you might get into the too long didn't read phenomenon. That's unfortunate, but I would keep the summary. I think the comments by Councilor Haneke are right on target.
Well,
Andy?
two things we could do so we can move on to the other issues. One possibility is to handle it by putting each of the key recommendations in bold in the document, so that the checklist becomes the bold. The other is that with the final version, whatever comes out of today's meeting, to reread them very carefully, because I think that the problem that was coming up was that I felt like in the first round, which was that I was commenting on initially, that the bullets did not always capture the recommendation that was being made and the reasons for the recommendation with sufficient understanding. And that was doing it with the first suggestion would improve that easily. Otherwise, it requires very careful wording checking on the bullets to make sure that the bullets don't get misunderstood.
Would it help, instead of making this like the lead, we included it as a summary or summary of budget recommendations at the end? Then at least people would have to flip through to get to the end in order to just focus on this. I mean, I'm thinking that that would serve as a checklist, and yet, you know, people presumably have read through the document before they get to the summary. It's just a thought. Councilor Haneke?
I don't know what to think about that. I mean, summaries in some sense are normally at the beginning. You know,
I understand.
I don't know.
Andy, is there a particular series of bullets in here that you have issue with, or is it just a general concern?
There were some in particular, but I'd have to go back. I don't want to, I think it would not be a good use of time to get into that discussion now. Let's leave it that we'll assume that we're going to do the executive summary and do a reread after we get to the next round.
Yeah, I know that
when we get onto the substance.
Kathy was a strong supporter of having an executive summary, so.
Kathy has, and I've talked with her over the years in the committee. She always is very keen on making sure that it is a readable document. Her other thing that she likes to do is to make sure that there are clear sections and that the organization of the document is sufficiently clear. And but you know, she comes from a slightly different view from prior experience. She can't speak for herself because she's not here, but from my having worked with her through the entire duration of having a finance committee and a council, it's a slightly different concern than I heard from Mandy, and I thought that I understand Mandy's point, and her observation as somebody who's relatively new to the committee in comparison to Kathy and me was very helpful, and I appreciated her reasoning.
Okay, so we'll leave it as now, and then as Andy suggested, we'll do a hard read on each of these specific points. I would like to add a clarifying point to the, I don't know, maybe we can pull up the document. if, right, the last bullet on page 1, where we talk about, the Amherst Regional Assessment, I would like to add a caveat in here, if, updated information, indicates an operational budget surplus, then prioritize. And that would, I think, address the concerns of the council, that we not just automatically update or increase the amount without making sure that we can pay for it, without having to do something drastic. Is that helpful, Counselor Haneke?
I wonder if the better way to do that would then be to, because bullet points 2 and 4 under expense projections are sort of the two that deal with allocating potential surpluses in after revisions of projections, right?
Mhm.
And so I wonder if it would be better to sort of move to 3, start with the 4 major functional areas, 3% year-over-year increases, then maintain OPEB at 600,000, and then sort of your thing that says if revised projections indicate further surpluses, and then have 2 sub-bullets under that. The first one that says prioritize increasing the ARPS base to its full base. And then the second one would be distribute proportionately to the 4, so that we have like 3 main bullet points and 2 sub-bullet points.
Okay,
That might then make it clearer.
that works for me. Is that okay with everybody?
I think it's okay with me. The one concern that I have about regional school discussion is that it gets into the whole problem that it's really a 4-town enterprise, not a 1-town enterprise, and which is why we were into this problem to begin with, because the other 3 towns came to a different, or 2 of the 4 towns at least came to a different view at the 4 towns meeting in April. And it's going to be interesting to see what the sense is. By the way, I assume that everybody now knows that there was a 4-town meeting scheduled that nobody mentioned mattered to tell us about. That's a week from Saturday.
Right. I got the email from Sarah Bass, in somewhere in the midst of all the emails about the library. But yes, it was not exactly well identified or well advertised.
No, I think what probably happened is a change. There's such a massive changeover in staff in the school administration, in the superintendent's and budget office over there, that they just lost it as far as the person who would normally have made sure there was notice in advance failed to wasn't there, no longer works there, and that was a consequence of what happened. We just have to go on with it.
Okay. So is there a specific wording you want to see here, Andy, in terms of the regional budgets, or do you want to bring up the issue of, we do bring it up later in the guidelines. We talk about how, we don't, so on page 4, we say a 3% increase in Amherst's assessment will not necessarily result in a 3% increase to the region's overall budget. You know, we talk about the member towns.
That's different though. Because the question of the amount of the budget in versus us is different from the question of the amount that we would be assessed, because it's a regional budget that is worked through a process that ultimately then gets presented to the towns, and an assessment, if it's agreed to by 3 of the towns, it's done. And which was what happened to us last year. And
Right.
let's face it, there was we had no choice at the time that it occurred. And I mean, you could just say recognizing that the assessment is based upon a 4-town process, and then just go on from there, because that's all you're doing is recognizing that it's not a subject we have total control on. It's at some point it becomes like many other things that happen to us, health insurance costs and everything, and assessments for retirement. They're bills. They're not things that we control, and ultimately. But on the other hand, this gives guidance also to the positions that we take in the regional 4-town meetings. So I think it's a valuable that we're having this discussion.
Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, I wouldn't change any wording here because it's a little disjointed, but the last paragraph of page 4 does, in my mind, what Andy just said we should say. You know, that it's determined by agreement of the member towns, that 3% in our assessment doesn't indicate 3% overall. And that we have to achieve agreement that's sensitive to our resources. So I think that paragraph covers Andy's concerns that what we say about our own assessment now in these guidelines is really subject to other forces. It might not be directly there after the prioritizing the increase in base, but it's in the document.
Andy?
And I think that the problem is not further down in the document. We were talking about the bullet and whether there was a phrase we could put into the bullet that would take care of not getting a misleading statement in that checkoff box area, or whatever you want to call it.
I don't think the bullet's misleading. Because we're talking about our expenditure projections. It's under expense projections. So we're talking about the Amherst Regional Assessment line. I mean, we could add the word line in if you want. Prioritize increasing the Amherst Regional Assessment line FY25 base to its full assessment amount, but we're really just talking about a line item here.
Andy, if you have, if you wish to, I don't know that we're gonna get this answered today, but if you have some suggested wording here, please send it to me and I'll incorporate it in the next draft. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, it is, because what I guess that I was thinking about getting at after Mandy's last comment is that something about recognizing that the ultimate expenditure for the regional assessment will be determined by another process at a later date. As you develop the budget, try to assume that the regional assessment will include the increase in the base, something of that nature, so that it covers both.
Counselor Henneke?
So this document's going to the regional committee and the superintendent. And at the last 4 towns, we came out and said, you can't expect us to be able to increase that base and start at a 6% base for your year-over-year increase calculations. I think this document is saying, is not intended to say, we're agreeing to start at 6% now. I don't think that's what we want to come at. And the way Andy just worded it implies, in my mind, when I hear it, that we're agreeing and sending a message that we're agreeing that we're going to start at a 6% base for all of these negotiations at 4 towns. And I don't think the council's agreed to that yet. I think the council's still saying, we don't know whether we can fit a 6% base into our FY26 projections before we start increasing year-over-year increases. That we're going to try, but that you school committee, regional school committee can't at this point rely on us agreeing to a 6% base. We are trying to be good stewards. We're trying to be cooperative and with the other towns, given what we heard at 4 towns, but we're not there yet. I don't want us and this document to say we're there, because we're not there yet. We're trying to get there. And I think this document needs to project, we're trying to get to numbers that would start at scenarios 1 or 2, to give a shorthand from the last 4 towns, but we're not yet at scenarios that start at that places that start with only scenarios 1 or 2. We're still at a scenario 3 or 4 potentially, but we're trying to get to a scenario 1 or 2 where the year-over-year increases are based on a 6% quote base. And the way I heard Andy's rewording implied to me that we're at, and we're going to guarantee a 6% base, but I don't think we're there. And so I don't want to reword something that implies that we're going to guarantee a 6% base when we can't at this point in time. Maybe in January we can, but we can't right now.
Well, I think we should be more explicit and say that. It's something, something to that effect, that we would like to get there, but we're not there yet. I mean, the budget projection is a deficit right now.
Aren't we there with, if revised projections indicate further surpluses, prioritize this?
Yes, we're there, but we don't know that we're going to get.
No, I know, but isn't that, if you say we should indicate that, haven't we done that with that wording?
I
It
don't know.
won't hit, it
Bernie?
won't hurt to make it explicit.
I just think we should try to make it as explicit as possible to say that, you know, we are not promising this. Right? I mean,
We had a lot of comments at the public comment section at the last council meeting in support of the schools for people who had genuine concerns about what was happening at the schools. And the stronger the statement we can make about that we are trying, the better.
let me see if I can word something, and I'll include it in the next version of this document. Because I don't know that, you know, I'm not sure we're gonna reach a final agreement on this without seeing something in writing. And so does, I think, I don't have anything from the meeting until we get to page 4, where we talk about OPEB, and I think we just need a clarifying statement that, you know, I think the idea when we put in that we'll slow OPEB funding, I think that sort of was that was misinterpreted as so you're actually cutting back on funding OPEB. So maybe we could just say that we don't support an increase in OPEB funding in order to provide essential funds for operating budgets or something. Does that make, is that clear? I mean, I don't want to imply that we're cutting what we're spending on OPEB. But we're really just holding it. We state here that we're holding it. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it slows it that much, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Paul?
no, the amount of money that we're talking about in the compared to the amount of OPEB obligation, it's really an insignificant amount. And I think that what was really happening is that there were a lot of people on the council who were just new to the council and haven't had an explanation that Paul started to give with some clarity. I think we probably should be working towards doing something to better inform the council as a whole. For example, nobody gave the amount of the OPEB obligation as assumed in the last actuarial study. And that's, you know, you start looking at that number and your eyes begin to spin. But we need to give that information to them so that they can understand the extent of the problem and also that the amount that we are currently having to pay to the Hampshire County retirement system in order to get that fully funded, that we will not be obligated to pay when it is at that fully funded point. Those are pieces of information that would better inform everybody about the extent of the OPEB difficulty.
Paul?
Yeah, I think you could just delete the second sentence and just say, we think it should be 600,000 now going forward. I don't think you have to, otherwise, if you start to explain it, you're gonna have another 2 paragraphs. I don't think it's necessary.
Melissa?
I was just wondering if the committee was open to, making the increase to the 650 after the other goals were met. You know what I mean? Like if we could stay on track, if this was a year that we could stay on track, that was, like if we could have it in a priority, that'd be something that the committee was open to.
Paul, did you want to? You still have your hand up. Okay, Councilor Haneke?
So I think that was part of this, the thinking around, or part of when putting in the second distribute the funds proportionally to the 4 operating budgets, unless the distributed would result in an additional sort of up beyond 3.5% year over year, then come back to the finance committee. Because I think, at least in my thinking, that coming back to the finance committee was to enable a discussion of, should we now go up in OPEB to 650, or should we, we've got 50 extra thousand above a 3.5%, or we've got 100 extra thousand above a 3.5%. We could give each major area an extra, instead of 3.5% year over year, 3.55 year over year, or we could put OPEB back up at 650. I think that's what the point of that sort of come back to finance before you make your decisions. If it's that large, is so that we can have that discussion of, do we want to do it with OPEB, or do we want to keep sending it to the functional areas, or maybe we want to put a little more to capital or some other thing. Because if the functional areas come in with healthcare costs at 10% instead of the 13 in here, maybe OPEB is the right place to send it. But if the functional areas all come in with 15 or 16% healthcare costs, maybe we do want to prioritize sending it to operating. I think that's where we wanted to have that conversation.
Paul, did you have any comments? I see your hand is still up. Okay. So do we want to, I would agree with Paul's suggestion that we just take out the second sentence in this one paragraph. Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, I am fine with that. I've also been on my own document kind of rewriting parts of this sentence to be clearer, well, parts of this section as well as the surplus section, to be clearer about the prioritization of where potential surpluses after projections are updated go, which resulted in me basically adding a little bit, but deleting everything in the paragraph beforehand except the concur with 3% equal increases, to move the prioritizing the FY25 increase in assessment to after the projections show the budget deficit, to match sort of the executive summary of those 2 bullet points. If there's surpluses afterwards, here's what you do. The first is prioritize that increase. The second is distribute funds proportionately, unless that results essentially in a more than a 3.5% year over year increase, at which point you come to the finance committee. So it sounds like, Bob, that we're not going to be planning on voting today on this, that we might do this Tuesday. So I plan on sending you these sort of draft changes so that you can see what I've been thinking. But I think that might make things clearer of, we have 2 recommendations for the potential surpluses that might be there. And it's very much potential. And we put them in the same spot instead of having them 3 paragraphs apart. And I did want to talk about the capital surplus just some rewordings of stuff because there was concern on the council that it wasn't clear enough. But we can do that later.
Yeah, I assume we're not going to vote on this today because Kathy really should be present for the vote. So, and she will be here for Tuesday. So and hopefully, we can get Tom and Matt in the conversation as well. So, Bernie, you're on mute.
My suggestion is to drop that second sentence and move on, especially if we've got more changes coming to the document. This really isn't a significant amount of money.
No, I don't think, yeah. I think it's just, yeah. So, Andy?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I also think that we could solve it by just dropping that sentence. And I had one other comment to make. I really appreciate all of the work that all of you have done on restructuring the document. In prior years, it was originally written in the first year to try and begin an education process of educating the council about all sorts of things about the complexity of our financial structure. And then it got continued on, and a lot of that should have been eliminated in prior years. And I appreciate the effort this year to finally do that. And education, however, is still important. I don't know if Melissa and Paul know when we're going to have the next actuarial study requirement for OPEB, but when we have that, I think it would be really important to then also have a real clear presentation to the council about OPEB, because otherwise we only see it when we look at the one footnote in the annual audit. And that's, the annual audit is such a complex document in itself. It's just a matter of the right time to do it, to really inform people. Councilor Arte's questions about it were just because it was something that he didn't think about, and I think he was speaking for others on the council too.
Melissa?
So I just want to say that we're required to do that actuarial study every 2 years. And I think we're just now finishing up our actuarial study for the most recent, and then we get an updated in the interim years. So like we have a full study, which is what I think it's just being wrapped up. And then we do an interim study, and it is part of our required financial reportings for our audit. So those numbers are always in there, but we can certainly do some kind of presentation to the committee or to the full council on what the current actuarials are. And, just so everyone knows, as healthcare costs increase, so does our OPEB liability. Like it's a number that's running away from us.
Yeah, I think I
You
think
know what the number currently is to share with the rest of the committee?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can get it and share it back to you guys. Yeah. Maybe for Tuesday. I'm not sure if we have the report yet, but we're definitely close. And as soon as we have it, I'll try and have it for Tuesday if we have it. And then if not, like I said, we'll do as you suggested to present to the full council, where we are with that.
I think it would be helpful to have some historical information as well, Melissa. So if you could go back 5 years or 10 years to kind of show the growth of OPEB liability, because as I recall, depending on the actuarial studies, the total number sort of bounces around. And it's very hard for me to understand what our actual liability is without kind of seeing the trend over time. So I don't know if you have that information or not, but that would be helpful.
Yep, I can certainly get that to you.
Okay, any other comments on this section? Councilor Haneke?
Not on this section. I have comments on the surplus section,
Okay.
but we're not there. If you're going by section, I don't have.
Yeah, I'm sort of going through. So in the capital budget, section 5 on page 5, I just think we should add to the fifth paragraph under that, something about including all capital, all anticipated debt as well as the debt that we've actually authorized, just so that we have a more complete understanding of what the debt services are. Does that make sense? I mean, I think we need to focus, we need to go back to these models, but we also need to make sure we all understand what we've cited, what we can anticipate in terms of overall debt. We don't know yet, obviously, with the DPW or with the fire, but we have a pretty good idea with the library what we're talking about, and the elementary school. So I think if we could, if we could get that information in there, and then the also, which I'm not sure we go into this in this document, but we definitely need to look at the assumption of $3 million for capital to see whether that seems sufficient or not. And that's beyond this particular document, but I do think there's a concern there that we want to make sure everybody understands what debt service that we are likely to wind up with. Councilor Haneke?
I thought we took all of that, and I'm not seeing it in here where you're referring to adding something. Didn't we, when we decided to just say we need further conversation and leave it at that in this document, didn't we basically get rid of all of those concerns about the model within this document?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Just go, we need more conversation, and then leave out the concerns from this document. So I'm not sure how it would go back in without getting into too much for a document that's not going to make a recommendation on that financing model. I think it just muddies the water.
Okay, fair enough. And you're right, we did. Okay, so anybody else have any comments in Capital 5 or Section 5? So Councilor Haneke, you said you had a section on or some comments on the budget surpluses?
Yeah, it was clear from the discussion on Monday that this section was not clear enough on what its intent was and what it was talking about. So I've got some changes potentially to the first paragraph, and then I guess it's the fifth paragraph, the last paragraph, the first and the last one. With the first one, the first sentence, I'm proposing a change to, it is reasonable to have an end of year surplus of up to 5% of the budget. Again, instead of prudent fiscal management to aim, because then it sounds like we're actually truly aiming not to spend 5% of our budget. When you use the word aim in there and all of this versus at the end of the year, when we close out our accounts, what is reasonable and what is not. you know, if we've got a 20% surplus, we would say that's unreasonable. We need to relook at our projections and our budgeting practices. But if it's up to that 5% amount, are we now going to say, yep, that's within our expectations? And so that comes from that's my rewording to sort of say anything up to 5% now would be within our expectations. We're not necessarily aiming for 5%, but that's within an expected range, that we're not too concerned that we were too conservative or anything like that. To maybe, and again, I'm one of the ones that has always said, are we too conservative? So I'm trying to say, and then at the end of the year, looking at it and going, well, this year we were at 6.7% surplus for FY24. Let's see why it's above that 5% range. Let's see if we can correct that back down. But up to 5%, I'm not going to say anything anymore. Is kind of what I'm trying to get at here. And then I added a sentence at the end of that, and I would change the 5 million to 5.01 million just to be a lot more accurate, so that it's clear what we're rounding to. But the last sentence, I thought one of the concerns it sounded like was we weren't clear what the next four paragraphs were trying to do based on the first paragraph. So I'd like a sentence added that says, the council proposes the following guidelines for the allocation of end of year surpluses after free cash is certified, or something for allocations after free cash is certified. Some sort of thing that says these next paragraphs are what we expect you to follow after free cash is certified and after we've got this potential surpluses and all. Just to be a little clearer on what this section is doing. And then I just, the change in the last paragraph that I'm proposing is just it's more of a not change in intent. It's just tightening up the wording. So I'll send that to you and all with the rest of these, but it's, I just want to tighten that wording up a little bit.
Okay, Bernie?
I don't know that I have a problem with saying up to 5%, but no one should reasonably expect that we're going to spend 100% of the revenues that we have in any given year. We are a going concern, and to maintain ourselves as a going concern, we have to retain revenues. Now, it's not necessarily that we're projecting 5% and we're going to hit that target. But were we Town of Amherst Inc. and we were looking to make a profit, we would include that. So you really have to keep in mind that we do need to retain some revenues year to year to year. Otherwise, we will find ourselves behind the curve. So let's say up to, but I think again, it's a question of educating, if you will, or informing folks that first off, this is not this process isn't something that is guaranteed, that there's happenstance through the year that allows us to generate a surplus. And secondly, that we should be intending on generating some degree of surplus to retain revenues for future use.
I didn't have any other comments or any other edits based on the conversation we had. Does anyone else want to have any comments or want to bring up any other issues? Okay, so Andy and Councilor Haneke, if you can send me your edits, I will pull everything together and have another draft, hopefully by this weekend, so that people can review it before the meeting on Tuesday. And then I think on Tuesday we need to try to wrap this up and get a final recommendation to the council. Okay. Um, so it's now 10:42. We have a discussion of the 4 capital projects on the agenda, but I'm not sure that we can really cover that in 15 minutes. And I'm not sure what more we can, unless people have questions of regarding the presentation that the council got on the 18th. Otherwise, I think we should just, I mean, it seems to me that we need to understand more about the models and the debt service before we have well, I think that should be our discussion. But Councilor Haneke?
Yeah, I just have a request. I agree, we don't really have time to get into the discussion today, but I have a request for when we do regarding information and what could be provided in addition to the model. So the model has, I think it was 4 different sections, the library debt, well, maybe it's 6 sections: library debt, DPW debt, fire debt, ongoing debt service for projects already approved, and then the rest that is generally kept at 3 million plus stuff. What I would like accompanying that is that 3 million broken out and pulled down, because I know from conversations with Melissa that 3 million actually increases 2.5% a year. So one year it's 3 million and then it's 3 plus. So I'd like the raw numbers somewhere in the chart that says what that leftover is each year. And then below that, I want superimposed, in a sense, our projected from the CIP, the 5-year capital improvement plan and our budgets, a projected additional debt, and regional assessment. I know the 5-year CIP ups the regional assessment from the 300,000 it is this year to 800,000+ every year. Those sort of lines that say projected debt based on the CIP projects that are in there, so that we get a better idea of, given our CIP and what we've put there, what that 3 million actually, it covers the wrong word, but okay, of that 3+ million, nearly 1 million goes to the region. Another X million would be for debt we've already projected we're going to take for, say, the Crocker Farm roof, or for X thing that's listed in FY29, or some fire truck that's listed in XY whatever, or repairs to the police station, HVAC systems, you name it, that have debt projections within that line, so that then we can see how much that 3 million's left over for what in the CIP is $5 or $6 million worth of projects. Just numbers. I don't need specifics, but those, just having it all in one place with actual numbers would help me in this discussion.
Melissa?
So what I'll tell you is that it doesn't cover. So, I mean, there's no way to project a failing plan. And so the problem with the CIP and any capital plan anywhere is that, like, this is what we see coming, but those decisions haven't been made. And I guess what I'm putting to you is that hard decisions need to be made about what comes first, and stuff that you might have put in to start tomorrow just won't happen because we can't buy a fire truck next year. We might put it off a year so that we can put something else in its place that is more urgent. And so, we can pull up the CIP from last year, and I think it has, I was looking at it the other day and I can't remember the number, but it typically has $4 or $5 million of additional stuff. That stuff we have to pare down into $3 million. And there's a couple of ways to do that. So it's possible, like I said at the council meeting, that we make decisions to borrow for things that we would normally have paid cash for, but then that also has an impact in the fact that those particular $1 million items now cost that much more. So the only way to get it all in there is unfortunately to go even beyond the 10.5, which I don't think anyone is comfortable with. But so these are the choices. We have to make choices. So I mean, I can pull up the JCPC projections, and some of that stuff is doubling what's in the projection, because some of the stuff in the modeling is approved debt, things that we know were coming, and what's in the model is unapproved debt for these large projects, because we had to sort of say, hey, these are really big, and what do we do? And I want to remind you guys too that my numbers that I put in the model are much higher than the original numbers in the model, and many have said they are not enough. I don't know that, but until we make a decision to actually find that out, I don't know how we know that. So I guess I'm just sort of saying it's bad news, and we can't do everything we want to do. We have to make choices. So are you asking me to redo the models with hypotheticals? Because that seems like a lot to say we can't do it. So I guess that's what I'm asking for a clarification on.
May I clarify?
Yes.
I'm not asking for a redoing of the models at this point in time. I'm asking for, it seems like at this point, for that 3 million plus 2.5% a year,
Mhm.
there is potential information about how bad the problem is in like 4 different spots. And it's hard to identify how bad that problem is when I'm trying to figure out in the CIP, is the regional 800,000 that shows up in the financial indicators budget on the expense side as a regional assessment line, is that included in the CIP numbers that I just pulled up from last year that show projected debt at 305, then 857, then 10, then 27, then 49 million. Well, 49's the full FY 25 to 29 projected debt, and new projects up to, those numbers with total cash capital at 7+ million every year. Is the regional line in that 7+ million? I don't actually know in the CIP whether it is. And so I'm trying to look at how bad the scope of the problem is. It would be helpful to have these numbers laid out alongside the model's 3 million plus 2.5% a year, so that we can see that difference every year, so we
Okay.
can see how bad it gets.
Okay, I'll see. I'll see. I'll have to work on it. I'll work on it. But I will say that the region's capital assessment, to the extent that they have provided it to me, and I did get an update from their treasurer several months ago, is that capital assessment line is in our projections as part of our 10.5%. So it is part of that overall grouping, and it's sort of built in there. So, but I will try and align that with the 3 million and what's included in the projected. I see what you're asking for now. Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I think those are legitimate questions that Councilor Haneke is raising. I think that's not necessarily, I think it's a different analysis than this capital projects analysis, unless the council is going to consider a higher percentage than 10.5%. I think setting the number at the 3 million plus is something that we're saying that's our budget for capital. That's how we're going to have to figure out what we can do within that time frame. Unless the council wants to take one of the capital projects off the table, but that's not been the mission. The mission has been these 4 capital projects are job one, and this is what's left over. And I think what we have to do in a separate analysis then is what do we do with that leftover money and what are the options? But I don't think that's part of, do we want to choose one of these models or not? I think it's and a pretty complex analysis, and I really hate doing the speculative sort of borrowing because it just, it's all over the map, and I just don't, I think it's a lot of time put into something that's really not going to be that useful. So.
Counselor Haneke?
I understand everything the manager just said, but I do think knowing the scope of the awfulness is important as we look at the models to pick a model. And I'm trying to get to the scope of the awfulness, but as you were speaking, it reminded me in the models at some point, the line of 10.5% gets above everything else. Can we also get, as you project these out, that difference once it does get beyond, so that we know in what year we start potentially having more than 3 million plus 2.5%. Again, just trying to see the scope of the problem and how long and how quickly. I know there's inflation and other issues, right? That it might, quote, resolve itself. Not that that's a good wording either, but.
So Councilor Haneke, just real quick, I can get you the number, like what the number becomes. It's typically, depending on the model we pick, 8 to 10 years before we get beyond that raising 3, plus the 2.5%, the 3 plus. But that's when we stop using the capital to get us to the capital expenditure. That's when we're moving, where we have all this room where we can get back on track for our other capital projects that we might need to delay.
Thanks.
That's helpful to know. It's helpful to have that information. I agree. Okay, did you want to add anything, Melissa? No, just anybody else have any other comments? Items not anticipated. Anybody want to raise some items that aren't anticipated? Okay, our next, Councilor Haneke?
Oh, I think you were going into it with next meetings. I guess, never mind, because come January, it's potentially a new committee, so we're not scheduling meetings in January anyway. So I was gonna say, can we get a schedule? But we're not actually scheduling much. Are we gonna have a meeting beyond December 10th in December?
I'm not planning on it. I would,
Okay.
but depends on what happens at the council meeting, but I don't anticipate we're gonna need one.
There was a meeting on the schedule for the 17th, but it doesn't make sense to hold that date because it's after the last council meeting. And then when the new committee is formed, there's a meeting on the schedule for January 7. But like I usually do, I'll poll the members of the finance committee once they're appointed to get that rolling to make sure that date works.
All right. Yeah, so we are planning to meet again on December 10th at 3 p.m. And I believe hopefully we'll get Kathy back and we can get this guidelines wrapped up and sent to the council for approval. Anyone have anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All right, we'll take a vote. I vote aye. Andy?
Aye.
Councilor Haneke?
Aye.
Bernie?
Support.
I don't see. Is Councilor Walker still here?
No.
No, okay. All right, well, then we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good weekend.